The snow came down like ash that winter morning, fine and slow, blanketing the horizon in a quiet that made the world feel long forgotten. The cowboy rode with his head low, shoulders hunched inside a threadbare wool coat, the color of dust and old gunmetal. His hat brim was frosted white, his gloved hand steady on the reins. He hadn't spoken a word since dawn. He rarely did these days. Not to the wind, nor to the mare beneath him, nor to himself. The land stretched around him in pale silence, just fence posts half swallowed in drifts, leafless trees shaking in the wind, and a sky so wide it seemed to weigh down the earth. He wasn't going nowhere special. Just needed a horse. The old one had gone lame a week back, and the walk to town had blistered his heel and soured his temper. He wasn't one for fuss or company, but the trail demanded muscle and hooves, and he was too tired to carry everything on his back. That was all this was. Business. No room for anything else. He reached the settlement near midday, a loose scatter of barns, half-built cabins, and a crooked post-rail corral that groaned under the wind. Smoke climbed from one chimney, lazy and gray. A sign swung above the barn door, creaking, stock and saddles, trade welcome. He dismounted slow, boots crunching snow and straw. A boy no older than 12 came running out, coat open, nose running, too cold to speak much but eager for coin. Inside, the boy muttered, jerking a thumb toward the barn. The cowboy gave a nod, then pushed open the wide wooden doors. The smell of hay and horses was thick, warm almost. Inside, a few mustangs shifted in their stalls, eyes wild, manes tangled. At the far end stood a thick-set man with a beard like rusted wire, chewing something and spitting it just short of his own boot. "You buying or trading?" the man called without looking up. "Buying," the cowboy said, voice low but even. "Plenty here. Take your pick. Prices ain't fixed, depends what you got in your pocket." The cowboy moved slow, examining each animal without rush. He wasn't much for chatter. He could tell by a horse's eyes if it had run when it mattered. That was enough. He stopped at a roan mare, her coat dappled like smoke on river stone. She was scarred along the haunch, but her eyes were calm. He ran a hand along her muzzle. Behind him, the barn shifted, movement so quiet it could have been the wind. But it wasn't. A girl. She moved like someone trained not to be noticed. Young, couldn't have been more than 22, barefoot, her dress in tatters. She wore no coat, only a patched shawl too thin for snow. Her long hair hung like tangled yarn, and her hands, red and chapped, held a rusted pail half filled with feed. She didn't speak to the cowboy. Didn't look at him, not directly. She walked behind him, toward the next stall. Poured the grain into the trough, knelt to pick up spilled oats with frozen fingers. The trader shouted something crude from the far end, something about girl ghosts and worthless mouths. She didn't answer. The cowboy turned back to the mare, but he felt something then. A pressure in the air, a ripple he couldn't name. When he stepped outside to think it over, she followed. Not close, not daring. Just enough. She waited until they were out of earshot. Then she spoke. "Take me instead." Her voice was small, breath visible in the cold. She didn't plead. She just said it, like a fact. He turned slowly. She looked up at him. Not afraid. Not brave. Just tired. "I work. I don't eat much. I clean, cook. I don't talk too much." He stared. "I ain't asking to be your wife. Just get me out of here." The wind pressed around them, tugging her shawl loose. Her arms were thin, dotted with old bruises. There was a cut along her lip, healing wrong. He didn't speak. His breath came out in clouds. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he's not sure is real. "I got no money," she added, quieter now. "Ain't worth a thing." The boy from before called out from behind the barn. The trader's boots clomped across the slush. She stepped back. "Forget it," she said. "I didn't say nothin', Dot." And like smoke, she disappeared around the corner. The cowboy stood there long enough for the snow to gather on his shoulders. He heard the trader laughing with one of his boys, some cruel joke about broken mares and cracked girls. He walked back to his horse. Untied her. Mounted without a word. But the wind was different now. As he rode away, the trail behind him already vanishing in the snow, he saw her again, just a glimpse, from the corner of his eye. She stood by the fence, feeding a horse with stiff hands, her eyes watching the horizon like she was waiting to disappear. He didn't turn back. But that night, when he made camp under the cottonwoods, and the fire burned low, he heard her voice again, soft, steady. "Take me instead." The words didn't leave him. They burrowed deep. And the next morning, long before the frost melted, he was already riding back the way he came. The girl had always known how to keep quiet. It was the first lesson life had ever offered her, and she'd taken it like a nail takes to the board, driven in without protest. By 22, silence was second nature. She wore it like that ragged shawl across her shoulders, too thin to be of use but too familiar to let go. Her name didn't pass many lips anymore. At the horse trader's place, they called her Girl, Thing, or sometimes Ghost. Once she'd flinched at that. Now she barely noticed. She slept in the loft above the stables where mice ran over her blanket, and she woke before the crows to sweep stalls, feed colts, and mend tack with numb fingers. Her hands bore calluses deeper than age, and her feet hadn't known a pair of shoes since last planting season. She had once belonged to someone else. Not lovingly, not like a daughter or a wife, more like a cart or a plow. Her father-in-law, a grim-faced man who believed misfortune was contagious, had passed her off to the horse trader after 3 barren winters. "She can't give no son," he had said, slapping his knee like it was a joke. "Might as well get a mule in return." The trader hadn't paid. He just gave the old man a hunting dog and 2 sacks of oats. Then he told the girl to get to work and not to ask questions. She hadn't cried then, nor after. Not even when winter came early and the soles of her feet split open from cold. Tears, she'd learned, were a kind of permission, and she didn't give herself many. The barn was her prison and her shelter. She knew the sounds of it better than she knew her own voice, the stamp of hooves, the creak of wooden beams, the way frost whispered in through the slats just before dawn. Some nights, she whispered lullabies to herself under the hay, not to remember childhood, there was little of that left, but just to prove her mouth could still move in kindness. Only one soul in that place had ever shown her something close to gentleness. An old woman who couldn't speak, mute from a stroke long ago, who came to stitch leather reins and clean saddles. She had crooked hands and eyes that had seen too much. They never spoke, but once, the old woman left a wool scarf under the feed bucket, folded with care. The girl wore it until it unraveled. It was the only softness she could remember. The cowboy had returned the next morning. She hadn't believed he would. Men like that didn't come back. Not for girls in rags. Not for anyone who whispered, "Take me instead," and meant it. But there he was, bootsteps steady, eyes the color of dry river stone, standing once more in the barn doorway. He said he wanted a different horse. That was all. The trader didn't question it. Just smirked and led him to a stallion meaner than the first. But the girl could feel it. That something had shifted. The cowboy didn't look through her this time. He looked at her, not long, not greedy. Just enough for her to feel seen and unsure of it. Later that afternoon, he stood outside the barn, alone. Snow fell in slow spirals from the eaves. She stepped out, dirt on her hands, a saddle blanket draped over one shoulder. She didn't speak. Neither did he. Then the trader called out, crude as ever. "If you want the girl too, take her. She's no more use to me than that old pack mule." The cowboy didn't blink. Just watched the snow settle on the hem of her shawl. "Trade her for the mare," the trader said. "Hell, I'll throw in a halter." The girl waited for mockery, some laughter, a shake of the head. But it didn't come. "All right," the cowboy said. She stiffened. Looked at him, waiting for the sneer, the catch. Instead, he turned to her. "You coming?" She hadn't moved. Not yet. Not until she heard the trader scoff and spit, muttering about fools and broken things. Then she followed the cowboy out of the barn. She expected a wagon. Chains. A rope at her wrist. But there was none. Only a brown mare and his gloved hand offering her the reins. The ride back was silent. He didn't look at her. Didn't touch her. Gave her his coat when the wind cut through hers. She clutched it close but said nothing. Gratitude, she had learned, was dangerous. It could be mistaken for something more. By dusk, the pines thickened and the air turned colder. They crested a hill and there it stood, his cabin. Small, weather-beaten, with a stone chimney puffing smoke like an old breath. There was no gate, no fence. Just space. And quiet. He dismounted first. Led the horse to the post. Helped her down without a word. Inside, the cabin was warmer than she'd dared hope. A low fire burned in the hearth. There was a table, a single chair, a cot in the corner. She stood near the door, not stepping farther. "You can sit," he said. She did. Slowly. Watching every motion. Her hands curled in her lap. He poured hot water from a kettle into a tin cup and set it down in front of her. She waited until he turned away to lift it. "You hungry?" he asked. "Yes," she answered, the word so small it nearly vanished in the fire's crackle. He didn't smile. But something in his shoulders eased. He served her soup, thick, with beans and something close to meat. She ate it slowly, waiting for a trick that didn't come. When she finished, she set the cup down with care. "Why?" she asked, not looking up. He didn't answer right away. Sat by the fire, stirring the flames with an old iron poker. "I don't know," he said at last. "Felt like someone oughta." She turned her face toward the fire. The warmth felt dangerous somehow. Like it might undo her. That night, she slept on a mat of quilts near the fire. He didn't watch her. Didn't approach. Just sat on the porch for a long while after she lay down, smoking a pipe and looking out into the trees. She didn't sleep much. The warmth was too strange. The silence too kind. Before dawn, she woke and swept the floor with an old broom she found behind the door. She boiled water, peeled potatoes from a sack by the hearth. She needed to move, to prove she was worth keeping, even if only for a day. When he rose, he didn't speak. Just nodded once, as if to say I see you. And that was enough. She wasn't safe yet. Not truly. Not in her bones. But something inside her, long buried, lifted its head and breathed. Because for the first time in years, she hadn't been asked to disappear. And somewhere deep inside that quiet cabin, something had begun to change. Not loudly. Not quickly. But enough. Enough to make her stay. In the days that followed, they lived like shadows beside each other, close enough to feel warmth, distant enough not to startle it away. No promises were made, no expectations placed. She woke early, before even the light had climbed over the pines, and set her hands to simple work. He let her. That, in itself, was a kind of mercy she hadn't known before. He never asked her name, and she never offered it. Names, she figured, were for people who belonged somewhere. She wasn't sure she did yet. But she scrubbed the hearthstone until it gleamed and patched the holes in his old wool coat with leftover thread she found tucked in a drawer. In return, he fixed the door latch that always caught at the hinge and left a wooden spoon beside her bowl one morning, carved smooth and quiet. Their conversations were brief, soft-edged things, spoken more in gestures than words. He'd leave a pail of water beside the porch, she'd mend the worn soles of his boots with thread from the blanket's fringe. He once brought her a sprig of wild mint and left it on the sill, and though he said nothing, she boiled it into the morning tea without comment. It became their quiet rhythm, their shared breath in a house built from winter and loneliness. Sometimes she caught him watching her, not with hunger or pity, but with something steadier, more patient. A kind of wondering. She didn't know what he saw when he looked at her. Her reflection had long become a stranger, hollow cheeks, salt-bitten skin, hair like thistle. Yet when his eyes rested on her, she didn't feel small. She felt, remembered. Once, while she was folding a frayed quilt, he spoke low behind her, not quite a question. "You sleep light?" She kept folding, then said simply, "Used to waking fast." He didn't press, just nodded as though he understood. Perhaps he did. He had the look of someone who had buried more than he ever dared dig up again. On a rare afternoon when the sun pressed through the snow clouds, she walked to the edge of the woods and sat on a fallen log. He followed a while later, leaning against a nearby tree, arms crossed. "My brother used to carve faces in the birches," he said, eyes distant. "Said if you gave the forest a name, it might not eat you whole." She turned her gaze upward. "I don't think the forest's cruel. Just honest." He smiled then, faint and fleeting. "That it is." Neither of them spoke for a long while after that. But they stayed, letting the silence stretch around them like a blanket no one had to fold away. The snow softened in late March, melting in puddles around the edges of the porch. She began sweeping dust out rather than shoveling it in. That felt like a kind of hope. She planted dried beans in a row of jars by the window, watching the green shoots push up with stubborn courage. He brought home a broken-handled spade and set to mending it with a strip of leather and quiet focus. One night, the wind came in hard. A spring storm, wild and sudden, rattled the windows like bones in a jar. She woke with a start, heart racing. The fire had gone out, and shadows gathered thick along the walls. She crept from her bed, barefoot, and found him sitting by the hearth, feeding kindling to a fresh flame. His hair was damp with sweat or storm, she couldn't tell which. He looked up. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," she said. Her voice felt smaller in the dark. "Storm did." He added another log to the fire. The light caught the scar along his knuckle, an old wound that hadn't fully healed. She sat down across from him, knees drawn to her chest. "Storms used to scare me," she said after a moment. "I'd hide under the bed. Thought thunder could tear a roof clean off." "Still can," he said. "But it don't mean it will." She smiled, just a little. "I used to think everything meant something awful." He met her gaze. "What do you think now?" "I don't know yet," she admitted. Still listening. Outside, the wind howled through the eaves. Inside, the fire crackled. He reached for the kettle, poured warm water into a cup, and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed. She didn't pull away. She took a sip. It tasted like cinnamon bark and ash, and something else, something like comfort. She held it close, watching the steam rise. They didn't touch, not really, but they stayed close that night. He didn't return to his cot. She didn't return to hers. They both sat near the fire until it burned low, their shoulders nearly touching. Later, when she leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes, she felt the ache in her chest not from fear, but from something she couldn't name yet. Something like peace, just beginning to take root. In the quiet that followed, when the wind had stilled and the coals whispered to ash, he spoke again. "You can stay as long as you want." She opened her eyes. Looked at him, the way one might look at a lamp left burning in a long dark hallway. "I don't have nowhere else," she said. "That don't mean you owe me nothing." She watched him a while. Measured his words. Felt their weight. "I know," she said. She returned to her quilts, and he to his own corner. But the space between them wasn't cold anymore. In the days that followed, she let her humming return. Low and sweet, like wind in tall grass. She didn't sing words, she didn't remember many, but the tunes came back on their own. He never interrupted, just let her fill the silence however she liked. He started telling stories. Not grand ones, just little things. A hunting trip gone wrong. A stubborn horse that wouldn't cross a stream. She laughed once, soft and startled, when he mimicked a mule's bray. He looked at her with surprise, like he hadn't known he could draw that sound out of anyone, least of all her. They worked side by side now, planting seeds in thawed soil, fixing the smoke flap on the chimney, patching holes in the roof. One evening she came inside with dirt under her fingernails and found a piece of fabric folded neatly on the table, light blue, faded, but whole. A dress. Not new, but better than what she'd had. She didn't ask where he got it. Just pressed it to her face for a moment before folding it again. That night, she wore it to sweep the porch. He noticed. Of course he did. But he didn't say a word. Only nodded. She smiled. It wasn't love yet, not the kind that leaps and clutches. This was quieter. It moved like snowmelt, slow, patient, destined. But she felt something inside her beginning to thaw. And neither of them knew it yet, but the world beyond their quiet woods was stirring. Voices carried. Dust rose. And the past, as it always did, had begun to circle back. The bloom of spring arrived gently, like a secret whispered into the land. Wildflowers peeked through patches of thawed soil. The stream behind the cabin sang louder each day, its voice brighter, freer. Inside the home they'd built from silence and second chances, laughter had begun to make rare appearances, shy at first, but real. She wore the blue dress most mornings now. Her hair, though still wild at the ends, was brushed and braided loosely. He had built her a bench for the porch, and each evening they sat side by side, saying little but feeling much. But peace in the Wild West was a fragile thing, always borrowed, never promised. It began with hoofbeats, 3 riders, their shapes thin and sharp against the late-day sky. Dust rose behind them as they drew near the cabin. She saw them first, kneeling in the garden bed, her hands still in the earth. Her breath caught. Her body remembered before her mind could. She stood slowly. He came to the porch, rifle in hand but lowered. He knew by the look on her face that they weren't just riders. They were something more. Something old. The horse trader led them, same sour eyes, same sneer twisted deeper by months of whiskey and pride. Beside him, his 2 sons, both mean and wide-shouldered, with hands that had only ever learned how to take. "Well, look what the crows dragged out o' winter," the trader spat, reins tight in his fists. "You stole what's mine." The cowboy didn't blink. "She ain't yours." "She was part of a trade," the man growled. "And I don't care if you gave her a skirt and a spoon, she still belongs to me." "She's not a horse," the cowboy said, calm as still water. "You don't own her." One of the sons laughed, slow and stupid. "Maybe we don't. But we'll take her anyway. Girl like that don't get to choose where she ends up." She stood frozen, the trowel still in her grip. For a moment she thought of running, disappearing into the trees, but then she looked at him. Not the traitor. The man who'd given her space to be real again. He didn't flinch. Didn't fumble. "She stays," he said simply. "You ride on, or you don't ride out." The traitor sneered. "You'd kill over her?" The cowboy didn't answer with words. He lifted the rifle, not high, not threatening, just enough to remind them that he'd done harder things in harder winters, and he was still standing. The wind picked up then, rustling the trees like breath through dry lungs. For a moment, no one moved. Then the younger son, impatient and hot-blooded, stepped forward, hand twitching toward his holster. She didn't think. She moved. Between them. Between the cowboy and the boy with the shaking hands. Her voice came out clear, louder than she thought it could be. "I ain't going with you." The trader barked a laugh. "You ain't got say, girl." "I do now," she said. And then the older son, less cruel, more unsure, spoke up for the first time. His voice cracked under the weight of hesitation. "Pa, maybe we just let it lie." The trader turned on him. "What did you say?" "She's not the same," the boy muttered. "She's not afraid no more." That hung there like smoke. The trader looked from his sons to the cowboy, to the girl standing firm with dirt on her palms and steel in her spine. "Fine," he hissed. "Rot here, for all I care." They turned their horses. Hooves scattered dirt as they rode off, their shapes shrinking into the trees. The moment stretched long. Her breath was shaky. His wasn't. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. Then shook her head. "No," she said honestly. "But I will be." He lowered the rifle. "They won't come back." She looked at him, tears welling but not falling. "I didn't run." "No," he said. "You didn't." She stepped toward him, slow. Reached out, her hand resting over his heart. His chest rose beneath her palm, steady, warm. No man had ever let her touch him like that, not with trust. Not with reverence. "I thought you were just a quiet man," she said. "But you're something else." He let out a soft breath. "I don't know what I am anymore." She leaned in then, and their foreheads touched, like prayer. Their first kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't hunger. It was the sound of two lives exhaling. A promise born from soil and kindness, not desperation. Later, after the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the earth, they sat on the porch again. Her hand in his. A basket of spring onions at her feet. "I used to think my voice didn't matter," she whispered. He looked at her. "It does." They sat like that until stars blinked into being above them. The wind was softer now. Even the pines seemed to lean closer, listening. Inside the cabin, the fire danced. Outside, the garden waited to bloom. In a world where so many things broke without warning, something here had grown. Not loudly. Not quickly. But deeply. And enough. If you had stood there, beneath that wide sky, you would have seen it, not just the cabin or the couple on the porch. You would have felt it. A truth passed from one scarred soul to another. That love isn't always the lightning strike. Sometimes, it's the shelter in the storm. The hand that stays. The voice that says, "You're free now. And you don't have to go back."